And Chris, you're here already, so I think that we can go ahead and move on, and we'll do that. Um, yeah. So I don't know who's sharing their screen between you, Chris and Joanne, but you can decide and go ahead and share your screen. And Jennifer, take it away.
All right, thanks, y'all. The second talk of today, this last session, is titled Testing and Stakeholder Engagement, User Acceptance Testing Strategies for Creating Informed and Engaged Stakeholders. Our speakers today are Joanne Archer and Chris Mayo. Joanne Archer, she, her, is a digital projects coordinator for the Special Collections Directorate at the Library of Congress. In this role, she serves as the product owner for the implementation of ArchivesSpace within the library. She has worked with ArchivesSpace for more than 10 years, both at the Library of Congress and the University of Maryland. And Chris Mayo, they, them, has been involved in managing migrations for as long as they've been working with repositories and library systems. Their career spans 10 years across higher ed and the private sector, and they are currently a contractor with Aretum, supporting Library of Congress's ArchivesSpace implementation and migration project. And I'll hand it over to Joanne and Chris. Excuse
Thank you. I'll at least turn my video on for a moment to say hi. Probably once I start presenting, I'll go ahead and turn it off. It's less distracting for me. Well, thank you very much for the introduction, and to everyone here for the last session of the very successful member forum. So as you heard, Chris and I are going to talk about some testing that we've run in the last year as part of the Library of Congress implementation of ArchivesSpace. And what we hope we can share is not only the role that user acceptance testing played throughout our implementation process, but also some of what we think are kind of low barrier to entry strategies and tools that can be applicable to a variety of different types of projects and scales of projects when stakeholder engagement and input is critical for a successful outcome. Let's see, get to my next slide. And I'm going to go ahead and turn my video off. So just to give you a sense of what we're going to cover today, I'm going to provide some contextual information about the ArchivesSpace project at the Library of Congress and why we decided to invest time and resources into testing. Chris is going to talk about strategies, tools, and processes with an eye towards how these can be applied in other contexts. And then we'll both close with some reflections on the impact of testing overall on our project. So I wanted to start out with a little bit about the vision for ArchivesSpace at the Library of Congress. And I think like many institutions prior to implementing an archival collection management system, we had data about archival collections stored in a myriad of systems that had developed over many years, ranging from our catalog to EAD files to access databases and spreadsheets. So our goal in adopting ArchivesSpace was to centralize this data, move to an enterprise level solution that could provide expeditious user access to collections and ensure this holistic, integrated, and sustainable collection and data management practices across divisions. So our stakeholders in this implementation included 6 divisions within the Special Collections Directorate, as well as 2 divisions within the National Audiovisual Conservation Center. And we ultimately represented this in 14 ArchivesSpace repositories in 1 database instance, and also included some of our general collections divisions as well. So to better understand where testing came into our phased implementation, I want to just give you a little insight into our timeline and kind of where we were when we did testing and where we are now. So not represented here is actually a pre-planning phase that occurred in 2023, and that actually led to our decision to adopt ArchivesSpace. But our real planning occurred in 2024, and we had a working group that was looking at various modules of ArchivesSpace, the resource module and the accessions module with the most attention. And significantly during this time, we analyzed how we could map our EAD3 finding aids to ArchivesSpace, as there was no import pathway for those finding aids. And this group identified gaps and desired modifications to better accommodate our data. And then during the same time period, the library identified funding to assist with the implementation, and that allowed us to hire a contract team to do the development we would need to ingest EAD3 finding aids. So in October of 2024, the contract was awarded and a 3-person project team from Aretum started, and Chris is a member. And then there are 2 developers as well as part of that project team. So as I've already alluded, our greatest challenge was the import of EAD3 files, and that's really where we focus much of our work throughout the last year. In the last year, we've made changes to the database to accommodate new EAD3 elements and other LC data. We created a batch import process for our finding aids, and at the end of the year, we successfully imported more than 3,000 finding aids. One thing that occurred in 2025 that wasn't in our kind of planning phase was that for a variety of reasons, we shifted to a decision to adopt the PUI. And this meant that we could look at the import of our finding aids in light of the display of the PUI rather than our existing delivery system, and kind of combining those, both our imports and the PUI, really drove a lot of our testing that we did. And then just to catch you up to where we are today, we did successfully launch the public user interface in February, and we are going to be launching the resource module for staff use in June, and then looking ahead to accessions later in the year. So much of the work to assess, plan, and communicate about our implementation has been carried out by, it looks big, it's not as big as it looks, in our Archival Management System Steering Committee and some subgroups. And as you can see, the groups have different focuses, each one supporting different aspects of the project. And in this context, I want to draw attention to the EAD subgroup. And this was a group of about I want to say seven individuals drawn from across our divisions who had deep expertise with EAD, and EAD3 in particular. And this is the group that really thoroughly examined ArchivesSpace EAD mappings, analyzed it against our EAD, and then identified the requirements for changes to the database and how we would do our mappings. We also worked with this group to prepare user stories and priorities that would help us kind of organize how and approach how we were going to deal with the issues that they had identified in this kind of planning phase. And so this is just some of the categories. We had essential, significant, and then a wish list. And so from the project point of view, we were really focused on the essential and then the significant. And I'm not sure that we got to anything on the wish list. So why testing? Here in this kind of graphic, you can really see the focus of our past year was the imports, the public user interface, and equally important throughout the past year has been testing. And it's really been an iterative process of checking our imports with our users in both the public interface, the staff interface, and then taking the results of that testing and feeding it back in to the loop. So testing was important for us because we had a stakeholder group that had brought specific issues and concerns to us, and we wanted to be able to report back to them on our progress. The testing process helped increase the transparency of our work and allowed us to demonstrate this project in areas of concern. We also had complicated data questions that we couldn't answer based on our own knowledge and expertise. We really needed our stakeholders who had this deep understanding of not only EAD, but also their own collections and data practices. They knew when something wasn't right. We'd also added this new aspect to the project, the public user interface, and that made our implementation both easier and harder, but represented just change, additional change, not only for our staff, but now for the public as well. And we wanted to just get as much input as possible into this process. And then finally, we were working in an agile development, or we still are working in an agile development environment. And we really did embrace the process of agile. We are doing sprint reviews and retrospectives and all of the ceremonies associated with agile development. But we also embraced a lot of the principles and values of Agile. And one of those is to deliver early and often to your stakeholders. And so testing was a way for us to do that. It not only provided a window into our work, but also was a way of ensuring we caught problems early rather than at the end. Our testing just basically aligned with Agile practices by providing this avenue for continuous engagement and collaboration while also ensuring that we were meeting stakeholders' needs and expectations. So that is really kind of when we ask the question of why. There are many reasons why, and hope I'm giving you just kind of an insight into that. But I am going to pass it to Chris now, who's really going to talk more about the nuts and bolts of how we did testing.
All right, thanks, Joanne. Um, so as Joanne was saying, I came onto this project at a very interesting point where a lot of work had already been done and was available to me in terms of user stories that could inform really like the first 4 or 5 months worth of the development team's work. But those user stories were based on partially like on an entirely theoretical mapping of E83 fields to the ArchivesSpace database, and also a certain amount of experimentation in the form of backwards round tripping E83 XML files into E80 2002 so that they could be imported into the ArchivesSpace sandbox. We did, once we had gotten through a fair number of these initial user stories that we like that the project team inherited at the start of our work, we had a functioning E83 importer. We were importing successfully, at least in terms of the import didn't fail, a large percentage of finding aids for each division, but we were aware that there were ways that the data was really still not coming in correctly. And we wanted to do a second round of importer development that was focused specifically on our E83 importer and how we could get that functioning better. And that really necessitated another round of testing. The next slide. So this is really how our process worked. As Joanne mentioned, we've been focusing on agile sprints. The development team is working on 3-week sprints. And the way we fit the test cycles into that was that in the first week of a given sprint, that was a test cycle with a given division, Joanne and I would write up the scripts for testing. We would hold an initial meeting with our testing group for that cycle. They would spend about a week and a half between late week 1 and early week 3 actually doing the testing. And then in early week 3, Joanne and I would start reviewing the feedback that was coming in, providing comments and preparing kind of a talk through of what had been uncovered. And then we hold a closeout meeting to go through the results with the testers after they had finished their test cycle. We were asking when we initiated these cycles for about 6 to 8 hours of commitment per tester during that whole 3-week cycle. So this was a really economical way to get a lot of feedback. And honestly, we estimate that we probably weren't even using quite that much of their time. Next slide. So one thing I want to point out is that this design was really intended to follow the best practices of uh, elicitation for functional requirements for project management best practices. The way an elicitation cycle is supposed to work is it's 3 steps. You prepare for the elicitation, you conduct the elicitation, and then you verify your results. So what that means in this case, our preparation, we prepared the testing materials, we scheduled, did logistics, talked with managers, got time, scheduled meetings, and we distributed a fair amount of information to the testers in advance so that they understood what was going to be expected of them coming into this. The actual conduction of the elicitation is holding the kickoff meetings where we would go through the materials that we had distributed in advance, make sure there's no misunderstandings about what's being requested or how any of the functionality works or any of those things. And then this testing process itself was asynchronous, but Joanne and I would monitor our results and kind of be available for questions during that period so that if we saw signs of someone struggling, they could reach out or we could reach out. We could make sure that we were getting that everybody was happy and on the same page. The third step, verifying results, is really the most important in some ways because what this is about is before, as a development team, we committed to doing work. What we needed to understand was, is our understanding of this work the same? Like, is our understanding of the work the same as what the reporter understands? Is there any miscommunication here? Is this work that is actually, is this a problem that is fixable via development? And is that development within the project scope? And so we would make reply notes in our spreadsheet that we used for testing about 24 hours before the closeout meeting. Then we would hold a closeout meeting where we went back through these spreadsheets with all of the testers, um, walk through their comments, walk through our responses to their comments to make sure that we had that shared understanding. And that, for example, when we were saying, oh, this is like, we understand why you're not happy with how this mapped, but maybe it's not something we can fix in the importer. Maybe it's a problem with the data model. Maybe it's something that's got to be fixed a different way. So you understand not everything is going to get a ticket. But when we created tickets for work, we were adding those to the testing spreadsheet in the appropriate columns so that users could watch their test results, as they kind of worked their way through our queue and got implemented. The next slide. So this is just an example of some of the information that we sent out to testers ahead of time. These were our objectives that Joanne wrote up that we were sharing to make sure that testers really understood what was the kind of feedback we were looking for, because we didn't want testers to like get kind of off track and waste their time reporting issues that weren't pertinent or that we weren't going to be able to address. We wanted to make sure that like we didn't have to uh not respect anyone's time in terms of saying like, yeah, you did this whole thing, but that's not something we can address right now. So this was just about making sure that there was a shared understanding going into the testing of what results we actually expected out of this. The next slide. As for tools, I did want to mention the fact, we did some assessment before we began the test cycles. Through Library of Congress's Microsoft licenses, we had access to really fancy, really powerful Jira integrated Zephyr test suite. We looked at it, we kind of looked at how it worked and what it would take to get our get our test cases set up, uh, teach people how to interact with it. And we said, librarians love a spreadsheet. Archivists love a spreadsheet. We're going to use SharePoint spreadsheets. We're going to take advantage of that lower learning curve so that our testers don't have to spend as much time learning how to use the testing tools as they actually do testing. And another thing that the spreadsheet was really helpful for that the fancier tool really wouldn't have coped with as well, was, as Joanne said, we really wanted to engage with our subject matter experts, with the people who are down in the collections, who know what gets a lot of high use, what's really high profile, what has data that's a little non-standard but needs to be non-standard for reasons. Y'all know, like the users know what is going to be tricky, and we wanted to hear about that. And we got actually a lot of really good feedback through the open-ended portion of the testing that definitely saved us from more work and tears down the line in terms of some of the outlier collections, let's say. Next slide. This is just an example of the testing spreadsheet. This is what it looked like before the testing started. You can see here we've got names of collections for users. If we're asking them to verify a fix that we've already created from that initial round of testing, we've got a link to the Jira issue for that fix. If not, there's no ticket number there. There's always a link to the exact collection that we want you to look at, or the resource, the archival object, whatever that page is. And then an explanation of what specifically is it about that page that we're seeking feedback on. Next slide. And here you see a separate section of the spreadsheet, and this is one that is kind of after the end of a testing cycle, where you can see the green text is kind of questions and requests that one of our testers added to the spreadsheet. And then the review notes are the notes that Joanne and I put in before the closeout meetings. So you can see there are cases where we were very much talking through things with folks in these spreadsheets and then again in the meetings. Like this specific case is one where someone asked for something that we said, actually, what you're asking for, what it does in ArchivesSpace means that there's not a ton of point of doing it in the specific case that you're asking for. So this was a case where we're engaging with the testers to say, we understand your request. Here's why it's actually not something that we should spend time on because it's not going to accomplish what you think it's going to. And just making sure that we have that transparency around what we're planning to fix versus what we're not. Next slide. So the results. This was super helpful for us in a lot of ways, because it really helped us break down into more ticketable work things that we knew like big problems that we're going to have different top containers, right? This was an example of an area where we knew there were going to be a lot of issues, but we didn't really know what those issues were going to be. And so this testing allowed us to articulate through the various things that were reported. Okay, this breaks down into several different types of issues. And then within each issue, there are several different units of actual ticketable work that we can do. So this process really helped us to break down those large components into work that was actually a lot easier to assign out to our developers. The next slide. And here, as you see, we did a lot of analysis on what was coming in and what we saw, what we were responding to. I actually feel really good about the fact that we had way more issues reported about the PUI than about anything else. Because as Joanne said, the decision to implement the PUI was only made a few months into the project. So it had not been considered in any of the inherited use cases that we started the project by working on. What this tells me is that the work that we did to start was actually very effective. The work that was based on the initial research prior to the existence of the E83 importer. But we also, got a reasonable number of tickets out of that. A lot of things about the PUI and a lot of things about, okay, there are certain things. It's not surprising to me that top containers is the next highest because the top container model in ArchivesSpace is very different from EAD 2002 or EAD 3. And it's hard to extrapolate how that's going to look in the database. So anyway, this is just really kind of showing that I think the initial work was really helpful. And yeah, this is the next slide. This is just a pie chart that we made of where our testing results are now, because we want to be really open about the fact that this isn't we're not saying that you can run a test this way and you're going to fix every issue and tell your stakeholders, yay, we got 100% of things done. What this helps you do is be really transparent about what you're fixing and why. So we have completed work on about half of the tickets that came out of testing. That big chunk in TBD, most of those are things that we identified, we created tickets for, but you saw Joanne's list of priorities earlier in the presentation. These were things that we said, okay, this data is importing, it's just not importing perfectly. And the imperfections are things that can be fixed via bulk update tools after import. So we're going to ticket this, but we might not get to that ticket. And this is really just about being as transparent and open as we can about what the development team is focusing on and why.
All right. So I think I am closing us out. And to just talk more broadly about impact. So I've had this note that you see on the screen next to me it's actually on my bulletin board over my shoulder, sort of as a daily reminder about kind of what our fundamental goal was for this project when we started, and just kind of answering the question of what does success look like. And I just kind of wrote this down very quickly one day, that, a success would be that we get our finding aids in, because at the time I wrote this, that seemed really, really, really hard. And that in that process, we would leave no essential data behind, and that we would leave no meaning behind. And I think gauging the success, especially of point 2 and 3, would have been really hard without our testers, because I think these essential data and meaning are really subjective. But testing allowed us to verify with our stakeholders that we were getting it right as we went along. And when we weren't, we learned that. So, I think that in one way, testing allowed us to get to that success of getting all of our finding aids in without leaving anything meaningful behind. But I think there were these unexpected benefits that, I didn't think about when we started this. I was very focused on how do we get our finding aids in. But these unexpected benefits are related to change management, um, as with just providing this familiarization and increasing comfort with the application through the testing process, this building of trust between our project team and the stakeholders, especially as they saw their feedback being immediately incorporated into development cycles. And this knowledge and willingness to engage and learn about the application is really actually now showing up as we begin training people in the system. Many of our testers are actually helping train others. They're creating documentation, and they're still helping us problem solve and devise solutions as we encounter them. So I think in reflecting on the testing experience, I think like the word testing program sounds really formal and rigorous and a little scary, to be frank. And while I think the scale at the Library of Congress, is obviously different with the number of people and divisions that we're working with, we didn't actually use any fancy tools. We came up with a pretty simple process that took time, but not much beyond that. And frankly, didn't really know how to do this when we started, and learned as we went along. I think that what testing takes is a willingness to try it, see what happens, to be open to hearing hard things and to hear when things aren't going right. And then most importantly, a commitment to acting on what you've learned from your testers. So this was, a really, I think, unexpected, uh, unexpectedly positive, and had so many more benefits than I ever expected, that I'm really glad that this was something that we committed to kind of in equal part to the other parts of our project. And so I think actually that closes us out. So yeah, I think we have some time for questions.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Joanne and Chris. Really appreciate this. There's a lot in there. So yeah, please, if you have any questions, please do drop them into the Q&A. I think those lessons learned in particular are great. Especially what you said about like doing the work of testing. It basically creates buy-in, and it forces you to learn about the application in a way that testing, and not even in this context, but testing things in general, sort of changes the way you interact with the application and forces you to learn about the application. I think part of being on the testing sub team of the councils for ArchivesSpace, it's another great opportunity to like look at the application in a different way and touch areas of the application that you haven't always done. And it does create that sort of feeling and sense of ownership. So I think that's great. And also your point about using the tools and the skills that are already available to you. Like if you're comfortable with spreadsheets, work in a spreadsheet. If you have Airtable, use Airtable, you know, like use the tools that are available to you to make this work. So I think that even though, yes, Library of Congress is very big and not everyone works in this sort of large scale environment, those lessons can be taken to basically any ArchivesSpace implementation. And congratulations on like you wrote all above finding aids. That was like the most impressive thing is that you got like all of your finding aids in your ArchivesSpace and your public user interface is live. I think that is just so impressive.
We are happy to have reached those milestones for sure.
Yeah, and Greg, I see what you're saying in the chat. Yeah, if panelists can't post questions, I guess because the idea is they're supposed to be answering them. But so if you want to drop something in the chat to the hosts and panelists, I can read it out loud for you. You could also unmute yourself, I guess. So Greg asked, it seemed like this work required new fields or data model changes in ArchivesSpace, right? Were there use cases or user stories that drove this choice rather than migrating that data into the existing data model?
Yes, we did add some new fields that were new to EAD3. And I think this wasn't necessarily a new field, but the repeatability, for instance, of some elements in EAD3, if we hadn't incorporated that, we would have lost critical identifiers that we needed, for instance, for retrieval. So that was usually the driving force. Like if we didn't do this and we couldn't find another place that functioned or another like field that functioned in the same way, were we going to lose meaningful data? And when the answer to that was yes, then we added the field. And sometimes we did find existing places to put it, even though it was a little different. Maybe in EAD3, we found that there was a acceptable place to put it in ArchivesSpace. And so we would do that. But sometimes there just wasn't a place for it to go in a way that didn't result in data loss or loss of meaning.
Well, Dan asks a great question. Are there any plans to contribute some of this EAD3 compatibility to core code?
Yes, we have been meeting with the Lyrasis team and talking about this. So we are, we will be working with the metadata subgroup or meeting with them soon. So yes, we are in conversations about how to do that and the best way of sharing the work that we have done back with the community.
Yeah, and I think it's safe to say be on the lookout for another community, presentations or discussion opportunity about that specifically. Really all of the work that you're doing. All right. Not seeing any other questions in the chat, but I'm speaking very slowly. So if anyone has any questions that they would like to pop into the Q&A, please feel free to go ahead and do that now. We are a little ahead of schedule, so you don't have to worry. If you want to ask a question, please do ask a question, but no pressure. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Joanne and Chris, for presenting this. This is really impressive. If you haven't gotten a chance to look at the Library of Congress's PUI, I recommend it. This is a lot of work and it's definitely paying off. So thank you so much, and for your willingness to present and share things back to the community. We're going to go ahead and take a break. We are a little ahead of schedule, so we're going to take a 15-minute break. We are going to come back at 15 minutes after the hour, which is the time on our schedule. So we'll be back on track when we get back together, but we're gonna go ahead and take a 15-minute break now. See you all soon.